The Magicians Podcast is brought to you in proud association with the Magic Circle, Alakazam Magic, and Gigio.
To me, most of Gene's ideas were horrible. And then he invented a completely revolutionary principle in magic with which you can accomplish almost anything.
Yeah. Yo, it's my life, my time, my rights, my rhymes, my grind, my struggle, hustle, sweat in my blood too. I'm ready to smell fear, I smell a lot. My competitors fled scared, cause they smelled I was hot. I want it all, excess, the sex, much success, stress us. I want it all, no less, so come on.
You're listening to the Magicians Podcast. I am Richard Young. Welcome to the show. Because I make these podcasts every single week, I no longer consider myself just a magician. I am also a broadcast journalist. Well, that's in my head anyway. Yes, I am a broadcast journalist, and part of that job is keeping your ear to the ground every single week and keeping your eyes open for international magicians who may be passing through the country to do a few gigs. That is exactly what happened with this week's episode. Mike Caveney and his wife, Tina Lennart, were passing through the UK for just over a week to do the Magic Circle Christmas show. Well, I pulled a few strings and called in a few favours and requested an interview. Even though they were doing 2 shows every day and it was a sold-out run, Mike managed to find time for me, so we met at the Magic Circle headquarters to record the interview you are about to listen to. If you don't follow us on Twitter, please do it now. We are at Magician Podcast, or you can give our Facebook page a like. I would really appreciate it if you did that. We are facebook.com/Magicians Podcast. If you've got a spare minute, please do leave a review for this podcast on iTunes. It'll only take you 2 seconds, but it helps with the podcast search engine ranking in the iTunes store, so that when magicians go in there looking for magician content, they will come across this feed. I do have to take a second here to sincerely thank Will Houston, who helped me a great deal with the research for this interview. Here he is then. Sit back, relax, and enjoy an hour in the company of the amazing Mike Caveney. So we're here today in the Inner Sanctum, which is the Magic Circle's equivalent of Copperfield's warehouse. So it's not quite as big, is it, Mike? Let's be honest. A bit smaller.
A bit smaller, but full of great stuff nevertheless.
It is. Thanks for agreeing to talk to me. I really appreciate it. How's the run going here?
We're having a great time.
Yeah?
Great time. I wonder if this is the longest one. This is 16 shows over 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's the longest we've ever done.
Yeah. So we've fallen into a rhythm, and the audiences have been great, and we're having a good time.
Good stuff. I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, in my research, I understand that the last time you were here did the Christmas show, that's where you and Tina got engaged. Is that correct? In Trafalgar Square? Was that planned in advance, or did you...
I planned it in advance. Midnight, New Year's Eve, Trafalgar Square. I remember it was so cold that the drunken revelers had to break the ice off the water in the fountains in order to dive in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was bitter cold. And that's why we think this year the weather has been unbelievably great.
Yeah, it's been a very, very mild December here, hasn't it? So you're from California?
Yes.
And I read some stuff about you which I thought was brilliant. One of which was when you were a kid and you started working for Owen Magic Supreme. They used to pay you in magic props. Is that a true story?
That is true.
What was the time like there when you were working there as a teenager?
Well, it's funny. I got interested in magic when I was 9 years old, and when you're 9, your world is pretty small. You know, you've got a bicycle, but that's about it. And then I discovered that there was a magic company, 7.5 miles from my house. And I thought, well, I can ride 7.5 miles. So I would ride my bicycle down to Owen Magic. And I remember going in the first time, and the shelves are filled with the most beautiful things you've ever seen in your life. And I thought all magic shops must be like this. Of course, later I found out that no magic shops were like this. Owen was really something special. And the magic that they built then and build today is just beautiful. So it was a really great place to get started. You know, to be able to, I'd ride down there every Saturday and just hang around. And eventually, you know, they see this poor kid just milling around all day long, and they finally said, look, why don't you come back in the shop and, you know, we'll show you how to polish metal. And I was ready for that. So I would go back in the shop. and spend Saturday, sanding wood or polishing metal or doing whatever needed doing. And that was just shortly after the time that Les Smith purchased Owen Magic Supreme from John Daniel. But what came with the shop was Carl Owen. And Carl, of course, went back to the days of when he worked for Floyd Thayer. And Carl had seen it all. He'd built illusions for Harry Keller, and he had just been the entire 20th century in the middle of the Los Angeles magic scene. So it was great to see Carl and to know Carl and to just watch him putter around in the shop and make stuff. And of course the people that came in, Marvin Roy would come in to get things repaired on his light bulb act. And I remember I was there the day that Channing Pollock came to pick up his double sawing a lady in half, the first double sawing ever.
Wow.
So it was, for a teenage kid, it was just unbelievable.
That's amazing. I understand you and Marvin Roy are quite close. Is that true?
Yes. He's been a huge influence, not just on me. When I turned 16, I joined this magic club, the Long Beach Mystics. Now, Long Beach is further than Owen Magic was. It's like 20, 25 miles. So when I got a driver's license, I could drive down to Long Beach and join this club of teenage magicians. And that was a huge thing for me to find this group of guys that were my age and were just as interested in magic. And
it's a bit of a who's who, isn't it?
It is today.
Went through there.
Yeah, of course, you don't know that when you're a teenage kid. You're all just hanging out with your buddies and you're all working on each other's act to do it on the big annual It's Amazing show. But yeah, when we look back now, it's like, wow, it's unbelievable.
Some of the names in my research was Weber, Stan Allen, Kevin James, and Marvin Roy used to pop in as well occasionally. Is that just some of them, I guess? There any I've missed out there?
Mark Kalin, Dana Daniels. Now I'll, of course, miss out. Armando Lucero, Les Arnold. It was an amazing group, and it was really focused on stage magic. Amazingly, I was sort of interested mostly in close-up up to that time. And I had just developed a manipulation act, a thimble act, to join the Mystics. You had to perform to join this club. So I did do this stage manipulation act. But once I joined, these guys had no interest in close-up. You say, you want to be a magician, you get up on stage and you do a magic act. And so that's what all of us worked on.
Your actors know now that we know. When did that all start coming together?
I guess when I turned 21 and joined the Magic Castle. That was a huge turning point because I immediately started performing at the Magic Castle. And at that time, their big theater was just this room down in the basement. Tiny little room, tiny little stage. But, I can remember going down there and seeing the greatest magicians in the world appear. I did a week there with Shimada once when he was doing his Dove Act and Manipulation Act. Back then we did 4 shows a night for 7 nights, and what an education that was. So that's when I really started, and I remember my act then. It was a jumbo invisible deck, the linking rings, and a money machine, and a rope routine. That was my act, and mainly it was just about getting up on stage and working in front of laymen and figuring out what works, and over the course of many years, I think the thing that was a big transition for me is when I put away my linking rings and changed that routine to linking coat hangers.
Of course.
And that separated me from all the other magicians in the magic world. And the routine that I wrote for that was kind of an odd routine where I looked like kind of an idiot guy that didn't make a lot of sense. But in the course of that, amazing things happened with these coat hangers, and that there was a sort of crazy logic that went with it. Things that I said didn't make a lot of sense, but at the end of the day, at the end of the routine, well, they kind of did make sense, and that people did see what I meant, and it seemed crazy, but it also worked and was true. And so that was kind of my first inkling of where I thought, this is a good plan. You take a proven effect a trick that has a great method, and we know that audiences like this effect, and you disguise it. I took the linking rings and disguised them as coat hangers, and I didn't say, look how amazing I can link these coat hangers together. What I said was, I'm sure you've all cleaned out your closet and ended up tangled up in coat hangers, and when you're a magician it's even worse, and they become linked together. So that was a real turning point for me, where I thought, I think this is good. I do not invent new magic tricks. I have friends that do, and I marvel at their ability, but I'm not one of them. But I do enjoy working on a routine, and so I'll take a trick that I think, I really like this trick. This is a good trick. What can I do with it? How can I disguise it, or how can I make a routine out of it that doesn't look like the routine that everyone else does?
And the comedy side of what you do, is that just, have you got people that help you with the comedy side of things, or have you just got natural funny bones, you think? Or?
Well, let me see. I don't know. I was always interested in comedy. I liked all the old film comedians, from Laurel and Hardy to W.C. Fields, to the Marx Brothers, and all of those kinds of guys I found really funny. And on the radio, Fred Allen I thought was very funny. So I would watch those guys and listen to those guys and see their characters and how they approached things. And I wish there was some simple formula you could say, well, all you have to do is this, this, and this, and then you'll have it, and then you'll succeed. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, there isn't. I certainly don't know of one. And all of the guys that I know that today are the funniest guys there are, like David Williamson, that I just saw down the street at the Shaftesbury Theater, or Matt King in Las Vegas. And I remember when those guys were struggling. They were doing funny magic acts, but they hadn't yet found what it was that was going to make them what they are today. So it's a long, slow process. And the great thing for me was doing those early routines at the Magic Castle 4 times a night. And, I'd record a performance, and I remember I'd be driving home listening to my little tape recorder on the way home, and something would happen, like someone in the audience would say something. And I would stop the tape recorder and I'd say, okay, what should I have said there? When that happened, whatever it was, if I had had half an hour...
Yeah, a bit more time, yeah.
What would be the best thing to say there? And I might think about it all the way home and try to come up with something better than what it was I did say. And if you do come up with something, you go, okay, when that happens again, and eventually it will, next time I'll be ready.
You mentioned some amazing comedy figures there. There's also one in film, which I think you had something to do with. You helped Orson Welles do, was it the Gypsy Thread for the Carson
Well, that
show?
was one of them. Tina and I both helped Orson quite a bit, which is amazing. I remember the very first time the phone rang, and I answered it, and I heard this booming voice, "Hello, Mike, this is Orson Welles." And immediately you'll think, okay, is this Les Arnold? This has got to be one of my friends. And it isn't. And Orson says, I'm working on a trick that I'm going to do on television, and I'd like you to help me, so come over. And maybe the first thing that pops into your mind is, well, I'm right in the middle of something that I really need to finish. And then you realize, this is Orson Welles on the phone saying, come over to my house. So you say, Orson, I'm on my way. So Tina and I would go over to Orson's house. He lived in Hollywood, and he has always loved magic. And back in the 1940s, when he had his big tent show, and with a big illusion act, and the biggest stars in Hollywood were his assistants. It was fantastic. If you see little clips of that, you go, this guy really got it. I mean, he's Orson Welles, so he's the great actor, the great speaker, and he has a true love for magic. He saw all the greats, Houdini and Thurston and Dante and everybody else. So he knew good magic. So now, of course, then he did movies and radio and everything else he did, but he never lost his love for magic. So whenever he'd go on these television talk shows, he would always want to do a trick. So he'd call us up and we'd go over, and usually it was some mind-reading thing that he would complicate beyond belief. But we would stand in the living room, and I would sort of play the role of Orson. Orson would sit there and direct us. Tina would be the assistant, usually. And he'd say, okay, we do this, wait, no, do that. And we'd talk through this thing, and we'd do it over and over and over until Tina and I could do it perfectly. Orson had never tried it.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was terrifying. So he'd say, okay, that's it. I'll see you at the studio at 6 o'clock. And we'd go away going, oh my God. And we'd try to have backup plans for if things went wrong. But he would pull it off. His voice was so commanding, nothing would throw him. And it seemed like he always just came out looking like a hero. And I remember going to these studios, and here are these Hollywood people working there. And of course, when Orson Welles walks in, they're in complete awe of him because of who he was. And these, floor managers would come over and they'd say, oh, Mr. Welles, I'm so happy to meet you. And Citizen Kane is my favorite movie. And Orson would say, we're not here to talk about movies. And it was interesting. He made that movie and the War of the Worlds radio show when he was in his 20s.
That's incredible, isn't it?
It's just unbelievable. And here he is now in his 60s, and all anybody wants to talk about are those things. He was tired of talking about them. Been there, done that. Let's do this magic trick.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump on one thing you mentioned there. I wonder if you ever spoke to him about it. You said he saw Houdini. Did you ever talk to him about that?
He had a great story, and I can't prove that it's true, but I don't care. It's such a great story. I've told it often. And Orson was a little kid, and his father took him in Chicago to see Houdini. And his father was a well-known guy, and they got backstage because Orson was already interested in magic. So the father said, well, you must meet the great Houdini. And it was before the show, and Orson's in the dressing room with Houdini and his dad. And Orson says, yes, I want to be a magician too. And Houdini's saying, well, now listen, the secret to being a magician, practice. You have to practice. You have to do a trick 10,000 times before you ever put it in front of an audience. And that's how you become a great magician. And at that moment, the door opened, and Houdini's assistant, Jim Collins, stuck his head in and said, hey, that vanishing lamp trick arrived from Conradi in Germany. And Houdini said, great, we'll put it in the show tonight.
Obviously, you're known to most of my listeners as an incredible author, and you've published so many books, and I panned over which ones perhaps today we should talk about. Actually, I figured that was a silly thing to do. Perhaps just ask you, what's the favourite one that you've written of your own work?
You know what? I wouldn't be able to single out a favorite. I will say I just spent 5 years putting my whole magic career down on paper for this big 2-volume set, Mike Caveney Wonders and The Conference Illusions, which was a great thing to do, to go back and look at all those routines and boy, I'll tell you really learn about a trick when you write it up, all the handling and the pattern and everything. So that was a great experience. I literally spent 5 years working on that. And then my friend Bill Taylor, who was a great Hollywood filmmaker and photographer, turned my basement into a photo studio, and for over a year we shot photographs to put in the book. And so I'm really pleased. That is an ultimate example of vanity press. I'm only going to do that once. I want these books to be really neat. So, we put them in a slipcase, and the lining in the slipcase looks like the material from my houndstooth jacket, and there's a tipped-in poster in the front of each book. And So I'm really happy. I'm really happy with that. And I tell people, look, I wrote these books not so you would produce a chicken out of a guy's coat the way I do. You look at these books and you realize that there are no shortcuts, that every one of these routines is this long, torturous process. One of the routines in there is called Magic Paper, and it's the torn and restored toilet paper trick. And in that one specifically, I wrote all 5 methods that I have used. Where the first idea came from, the first method, which was terrible, the second method, which I thought, well, this is fantastic, and wasn't, and the third method that I used for a while, and why I abandoned that method, and then finally when I landed on method number 5, why I've stuck with that for so long. And you just see, wow, when you watch the routine, it looks pretty obvious, really. I mean, it's a very simple method, but to me, you only get to that after going through this whole process of all these methods that weren't that good. And so that's what I want people to look at that. You go, look, work on a trick, find a trick that you like, and start going down that road, and know that you're not alone when you're thinking this is never going to be good. You just keep doing it in front of an audience, and they will answer your questions, and keep plugging along, and eventually, hopefully, it will be good.
As I mentioned to you, we've already had Kevin James on this series, and one of the most amazing things Kevin talked about was the creation of the operation illusion.
He did.
And he explained that actually it was you who...
I remember that.
Yeah, you went to his house and he said you've got this amazing, huge archive of everything about the sawing in half illusion. And obviously in that was an example of the method which he uses now. He said hopefully one day you're going to write up a big sawing in half book. Is that in production, or is that something that's gone on hold?
That is funny. When I was in college, a very long time ago, I had some theater class or something, and you had to do a big fat term paper on something to do with theater. And I told the professor, I said, you know what, I'd like to have my paper on the history of sawing a lady in half. And he looked at me like, what on earth are you talking about? And then he thought, well, I don't know anything about that. It's like, I think I'd like to read that paper. So he said, okay. And that's when it started. And so I started doing my research as I could. And I can't believe it. The thin sawing that we know today goes back to a magician in Turkey named Zadi Sungar. Somehow I got an address for Zadi Sungar, who was still alive, and wrote him a letter, and astonishingly he wrote me back with his side of this story, which included a guy from Hungary then, Tahani, who had his own big show, and I had met Tahani. Tahani had come to Los Angeles. And it involved Carl Owen and John Daniel, both of whom I knew. And so I interviewed all these people and went back to find out everything I could find out about P.T. Selbit and about Horace Golden. And I wrote this big term paper. And I kind of never let go of that. Every time I'd find some interesting thing about sawing a lady in half, I would keep it or make note of it. A few years ago at Magic Live, Stan Allen had this idea where we would do a documentary stage show and tell the history of sawing a lady in half. And we would have guys perform different versions of the trick throughout the show. And I told him that's a terrible idea. Because I just tried to imagine myself saying, and now here's another version of the trick that you've already seen 3 times. And it just seemed like, but actually he and Matt King talked me into it. So I wrote a script and we did this show. And I was completely wrong and they were completely right. It was really an interesting show. And I got to use lots of photographs and posters and playbills that we showed on the big screen. And then we had this roster of guys performing all these amazing versions of the Sawing a Lady, including Kevin's, which is unbelievable.
What is your favourite version? Is that a tough question?
It's a tough question. I think I would say Ritchie Artie. When I did the It's Magic show, I got to host the It's Magic show, which is Milt Larson's big annual show in Los Angeles that I grew up going to. That was the big event of the year back then. And it was in 1981 that I emceed that show, which was really a thrill because I got to introduce a young guy that in Los Angeles nobody had ever heard of before, named Lance Burton. And closing the show was Ritchie Artie, who was phenomenal. They wouldn't let him do his Sawing in Half because I think Milt thought Los Angeles wasn't ready for that. But shortly after that, I went to New York with Ritchie Artie and appeared for a couple weeks with him at Madison Square Garden, where he did do it.
You played Madison Square Garden?
I know. It sounds unbelievable.
Is it the theatre downstairs?
It is, yes.
Yeah, it's 5,000 seats, I think.
It's huge,
isn't it? Yeah.
It's actually a boxing arena that they put a stage and curtain in. I remember one night when we were there, we got in a freight elevator and took it up and walked out onto this thing and found ourselves standing on stage, I mean this enormous stage, in the real garden.
Oh, wow.
While Rod Stewart was performing to this packed house. That was amazing. But I got to watch Ritchie Artie do this every night for 2 weeks, and where he would, the blood and guts would go flying all over the audience and all over the stage, and then he would invite members of the audience to come up for a closer look if they wanted. And it was the last thing in the show, and so this would go on for well over a half an hour. It was like a funeral procession. Because there'd be a few thousand people. It was called the Felt Forum. That's the room downstairs at the Garden. And they would line up on one side, and they would come up, and just like a funeral, pass in front of this girl, which was Ritchie Artie's daughter, Rena, laying there in a pool of blood. And they just didn't know what to think. They would look at him and go, why? Why did you do this for us? Because, a magic trick is one thing. Usually when you see someone do the buzzsaw, a bunch of confetti goes flying up in the air, But here, there's intestines hanging off the front of the table. And they just didn't know what to think. It was amazing.
You mentioned Magic Live. Of course, you co-host your own magic convention. It's a conference.
Conference, yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about why that came about in the first place?
Well, why it came about, because Ricky Jay decided that when he was in charge of the John Mulholland Library in Los Angeles, he wanted to do a conference for magic historians. And he had Jim Steinmeier and John Gahn help him put it on. And I was a speaker at the first one, and it was fantastic. And then with the second one, it happens every other year. They asked me if I would be an organizer, which I was happy to do. And that's when Ricky disappeared from the conference. And so Jim and John and I have done it ever since. We just finished our 14th conference.
Wow.
And yeah, it has turned into a bit of a beast. It's always been in the same little hotel, which for the first couple was plenty big enough. And we were begging people to come, and now it's nowhere near big enough, and we have to turn people away, and we don't like doing that. But it is quite an amazing thing.
What have been some of your highlights of that over the 14?
The one highlight that I think everybody would put at number one would be the hooker card rise, because that's a trick that's appeared in magic literature. It's written up in Greater Magic. And when you read the description, you say, well, I don't think this is what happened. It just sounds too impossible. It was a trick that this guy in Brooklyn, New York built at his house, and it's just really a series of rising cards. He would invite all the greatest magicians in the world to come to his house and to see it, and they all went, and they all wrote him letters saying, that's the greatest magic trick I've ever seen in my life, and I don't have any idea how it works. And then it wasn't really seen for many, many, many decades. And that's when people said, I don't buy it. I don't think that that's what happened. And then John Gahn found who had the apparatus and bought it and brought it home and figured out what it must be and put together about a 20-minute version of the Hooker card rise. And it was amazing because all the guys that come to the conference, these are the guys who are the real historians of magic. I mean, from all over the world they come to this. And they're really smart. They really know the history of magic. And they went into this room in small groups and watched this show and came out and said, not only do I now believe what I've read about this, it's better than what I read. And I have no idea how it worked.
In the 2001 conference, you did Carter the Great's $1 Million Mystery
Yes,
principle.
I would say that for my contribution to the conference, probably the $1 Million Mystery would be the number one on my list. Partly because when I bought Carter's show, I got his original apparatus, and it's just beautiful. So to me, it's really special. Some years I've had to build from scratch a trick. And, it's okay, and I learn a lot from building this thing. But there's something else to be able to push out on stage for the first time in 75 years. I think Carter's $1 Million Mystery was last performed at the World's Fair in Chicago in 1933. So to polish that all up and put it back on stage is really exciting. And the principle, which I have written about at great length in my Conference Illusion book and elsewhere by Walter Jeans, and we're sitting right under a letter from Walter Jeans, this crazy British inventor, and I published Peter Warlock's book on Walter Jeans. And it's amazing. To me, most of Jeans' ideas were horrible. And then he invented a completely a completely revolutionary principle in magic with which you can accomplish almost anything. So we put together a routine that was like what those guys did back in the day, because when this trick came out in the 20s, everybody was doing it.
Well, it still fools magicians to this day, doesn't it?
Yes.
A lot of magicians don't know about it.
No. And they don't realize that they've seen it, that Siegfried and Roy used it, and that David Copperfield used it, and that Doug Henning used it. Luis de Matos has used it on television, and it's just so devious and deceptive that they don't know what they're looking at. So it was really great to put that all back together, and there's all, the only way to learn a trick, you can write about it all you want, but when you actually have to put it up on stage in front of people and light it and get music and costumes, and that's when you really learn about a trick.
Must be a real adventure, that one.
It is an adventure.
Especially with balconies and things like that.
And that's one of the great things about the conference. We get to take tricks that are today completely impractical, that you would never do today, and do all that to them. And if only for one night, put them up in front of a select crowd and let that trick shine if it still can. And the thing that we've learned, that we keep proving to ourselves over and over and over, those guys back in the day were really smart, and they had some really good ideas.
The Magicians Podcast brought to you in association with the Magic Circle, the world's premier magical society. Are you ready to join the world's most exclusive magic club? Visit themagiccircle.co.uk to find out more.
Gigi-O, free for 30 days. Be a pro, get Gigi-O.
Gigio, my friends, is a web-based software designed for professional and semi-professional magicians anywhere in the world. If you do gigs, you need Gigio. It will save you hours in the office every single week. It generates PDF contracts and invoices. It tracks your payments. It updates the diary automatically on your phone, and it even tracks your mileage as well. Read what all the top professionals who use it are saying about it, and take a free 30-day trial right now at gigio.co.uk. That's Gigio, spelled GIGGIO.co.uk.
Whether you're new to magic or a seasoned professional, Alakazam Magic are here to help. Alakazam have been supplying magic to magicians for well over 20 years. Not only do we carry all the latest and greatest magic tricks, books and DVDs, but we also manufacture one of the finest ranges of magic tricks in the world. The Alakazam name is synonymous with great customer service, educated advice and honesty. So if you're shopping for new magic, make sure you check out our website www.alakazam.co.uk or pay a visit to our fully stocked shop.
I know you have a massive collection of props and obviously literature as well. I hope you don't mind me asking this. It's a slightly personal question, I think, to ask a collector. But what would you like to happen to your collection?
That's an excellent question, and I wish I had an excellent answer. I don't, but I will tell you what won't happen, but what I wish could happen. So I've been collecting this stuff most of my life, and when I think back of all the places that I found this stuff, like Thurston's O chair, this vanishing lady illusion that we performed at the conference one year, that came out of a barn in Wisconsin where Thurston's show had been rotting away for decades.
Wow.
And to pull this old chair out into the sunlight for the first time in 60 years, and it was just gray with dirt, and one of the legs was missing, and to haul that back home and to clean it up and find this beautiful paint underneath all the dirt, and then to find the missing leg and put that back on, and then to perform it on stage, that's really exciting. And there have been so many adventures like that of poking around and finding great things. And so in a perfect world, I wish I could take everything in my collection and put it back where I found it so that somebody else could have that thrill of discovery. That's not going to happen. So here's one of my problems. It would be real easy to just say, hey, when I'm gone or when I'm done, just have a big auction and sell it off. The reason why that's tougher for me is because back in the year 2000, my friend George Daly and I are the two guys who purchased David Price's Egyptian Hall Museum. So people don't know what that is. Egyptian Hall, I thought that was in London. Well, of course it was in London. But in 1895, a guy in America named W.W. Durbin, who was a magician, he built a little theater in his back garden. And he said, London is famous for its Egyptian Hall magic theater. I think America should have its own Egyptian Hall. And so he named his little theater at home Egyptian Hall. And to decorate it, he asked all of his friends, now remember this is in the 1890s, for pictures and posters. And they all knew Durbin and they liked Durbin, so they'd give him stuff and he'd put it up on the wall until the walls of this theater were just covered with photographs of all the great magicians of the time. And in the 1950s, David Price, who was a collector, purchased everything that was in Egyptian Hall to add it to his own collection. And he took the name, at that time, Egyptian Hall Museum. And for almost 50 years, David Price bought collections and posters to increase the size of his collection, until David Price had the largest collection of magic lithographs in the world. Plus, he had amazing apparatus, and he had a great library, he had a great magazine collection. So it was astonishing. And I many years ago, I went to Tennessee, where David lived, to visit, and it was just unbelievable. There was no place on earth you could see what you could see at Egyptian Hall. And then David passed away, and his son, who was a collector of circus material, decided he would sell the magic collection. And he asked George and I, when we said we would be interested, what would happen to the name Egyptian Hall? And George said, well, you know what? I'm actually just in this to enhance my own collection. And I said, well, you know, this name's been around for a long time, over 100 years already. I would like to continue it. And he said, that's the right answer. If neither of you had wanted that name, we would have had a problem. And if both of you had wanted the name, it would have been a problem. But the fact that one of you does, that one of you do wants to continue this, let's make a deal. And we did. So now, what I call my collection, Egyptian Hall Museum. And after now 120 years, I would hate to be the guy that just it ended on my watch. I would love to find somebody, the same way Dave Price the third did in George and I, somebody who's really interested in this stuff, who doesn't just want to sell it and make as much money as they can, but that would want to use it and share it and all of that. And I don't know who that is at this time. So I don't have a good answer for you. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I hope I still have time to figure it out.
How important is Copperfield's collection? I know you've traded some things with him, haven't you, over the years? Do you have a kind of good dialogue there? If you need to do research, you were allowed to go and see his things if you're working on something, or?
I have had access to David's collection, and at other times I haven't. It's hard. I saw George Daly and I, in fact, just a few months ago went up there, and David gave us the Cook's tour. And his collection, it's the biggest collection of magic on earth. No one can compete with this. He has unlimited funds to throw at it. He has bought unbelievably important things in the magic world. And of course, David, what he really loves is presenting things. You know, you just have to watch his show and see the lighting and the music. I mean, it's just perfect. He'll just work till it's perfect. And so his museum right now, he's in the process of, I would say, at least tripling the size of his museum. And it's going to be an amazing journey to walk into this little recreated magic shop and then walk into the back room of the magic shop, like the stock room, and see the Robert Albo apparatus collection as if this is the stock waiting to go out on the shelves of the magic. And then the Hall of Masters with Herman and Keller and Maskelyne and Dante and Blackstone and all of their props and costumes and posters. And then into another space with Channing Pollock and Marvin Roy and Jack Codell and Al Coran, Cardini. He's just got unbelievable things to show.
Can we talk about your bow and arrow routine? It's my favourite thing that you do.
Really?
Yeah, I love it. I've watched it, and I actually first saw it when I was a kid. You did it on the Paul Daniels
That's right.
Secret Show. One of my favourite lines of all time of a little bit of cooperation will keep both of us from dying up here. I love that line. How did that routine come about?
So, let me see. I think my book Magic Comedy came out in like 1981. I already had the idea for the bow and arrow then, but I didn't have a method. And where it came from was, I like the card sort. I've never done the card sort, but I think that's a really neat effect. It seems, actually, it seems a little too amazing, to be honest.
Yeah.
You know, especially with 3 cards. When they, like some guys, they go, and there's 3 cards on the sword, you go, hey, sorry, I'm not buying that. 1 card on the tip, well, I don't know, maybe, but it's still a little hard to believe. But I bet, not that I've tested this, if you had a really sharp arrow and you shot some cards up in the air and took a real bow and shot it, I'll bet you could pierce a card.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I think that's possible.
Yeah, so I like that this is possible. I mean, I don't present it as a trick. I am an archery expert in that routine. So I thought I would like to do the card sword, but with a bow and arrow. But, you can't just go shooting an arrow around. And I wasn't sure how to get the card on the arrow. Now, the first thing you think of is, well, I'll make an arrow like a card sword, and I'll have a piece of elastic down the middle, and it'll pull it up there. You have no idea what a bad idea that is. It completely doesn't work. And if a arrow is made like that and shot into the air, and as it's going through the air, this elastic is pulling around in a card, the arrow just does cartwheels in the air. It's horrible. After I started doing this trick, I actually found in an old magazine an ad for a bow and arrow card trick. And I'm not sure the method that they used, but I've never heard of anyone doing it. I've never seen a prop, so I don't think it was successful. Anyway, so in 1981, I was already thinking about the bow and arrow trick. And a long time went by. I'm sure more than 10 years. And every once in a while, I'd get it out and start thinking and fooling around. And then I came up with the method, which is the simplest possible method. First of all, I should say I lay out parameters. I go, okay, I'd like to do this trick, but if I do it, I don't want a torn corner. I want it to actually be the card that the person picked, so they could write their name on it and keep it. So that changes things. Well, I can't do this method and I can't do that method. And then I figured out this method, which is super simple and allows me to do all of that. So then I started fooling around with it, and I made one, and man, and again, in the book, I talk a little bit about the early versions. I used a little kid from the audience, and I had a big box sitting on a stool full of gimmicks, and I mean, looking back, it was all wrong. But the method was on its way to working. So again, you just do it. I do weeks at the Magic Castle and change things, and yeah, I would say it's one of my favorite routines now. It's really fun, partly because at the time where I decided to do this routine, I had already established my character, which is a guy who makes preposterous claims of things that he's going to do, and the audience is thinking, this guy is out of his mind. Like I want to have a cup of coffee, so to stir up my coffee, of course, I put the cup in a hoop and throw it up in the air. And they're going, what are you, crazy? And then I do it, and it's successful, and they think, geez, this guy is nuts, but he did it. And so with the bow and arrow, I propose this impossible, preposterous shot where the woman is convinced somebody's going to get killed. And I end up not doing that shot, but doing an even more amazing shot and piercing her card out of midair.
There's that lovely line, I'm not sure if you still do the line, forgive me, because it was 20 years ago when I saw it on Paul Downs, where you say, you don't think I'd do this shot if I couldn't make it like 90% of the time?
Word for word.
I love it. Brilliant.
So I did that trick at Ron's Day over here once, and Paul Daniels was in the audience, and he said, that's it. I want you to do that on my TV show, which was great fun.
We've been very lucky we've had Paul on this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
It's a 2-hour-long episode, his whole career. It's amazing. My friend Will Houston, who is...
whom I haven't seen since I arrived.
Have you not? He's a wonderful magician, a great friend of mine. And I spoke to him about me speaking to you today. And I think he's come up with the greatest question which we could ask you. And I think you're probably one of only a few people on the planet who have the authority to answer this question, actually.
No, I'm worried.
And that is, how will this period of time be remembered in 100 years from now, do you think?
Yeah.
Is there some stuff around today that will stand the test of time? Or maybe magicians who will stand the test of time?
That's a good question. And I just read, I wonder what it was on somewhere, somebody said, hey, is this the golden age of magic? Which is a valid question. It's not, so that's my answer. And to prove it that it isn't, you need to find some of these old magic magazines. The Magazine of Magic, Will Golston's, and Max Sterling had a magazine back then, back in the teens. And it lists who's appearing where. And you can look under London, and it's just mind-boggling. You know, Carl Hertz, Harry Houdini, Chung Ling Soo, Lafayette, Horace Golden. They're all you could go see any one of those guys on any given night because they're in theaters all over the London area. That has to win as the golden age.
Yeah.
But that certainly doesn't mean there aren't great things going. And you know what? There's always great things going on. You could take the worst period of magic and find people that did just fantastic, great, astonishing things. So when I think about my age group guys, and of course there's a couple generations that have come along since, but I think of guys like Tommy Wonder. Tommy is a guy that they will look back at and say, wow, this guy had it all. Close-up table, stage, talking, silent. He could do it all. And before Tommy, and interesting, from the same country, was Fred Capps. Fred is a guy that they will always look at and say, you know, regardless of what time period he was in, that guy was a master. And there will be guys like that now. So it's easy to sound like an old fogey when you say, well, in my day, you know, we never did that. We always did this. And every generation does that. I can remember the old guys when I was a kid doing that. They thought we were going to kill magic. And there's lots of reasons why my generation can think the same thing today. And I guarantee that the young generation will think the same thing when the new guys come along. But what I do regret is the demise of the magic shop. Magic shops seemed like such a great place to learn about magic and to really get a foundation in magic. And they're all gone, basically. I remember Robert Harbin saying that he thought, and I've always thought this was great, all magic shops should be on the second floor. And I go, what, really? Yep. If it's on the main floor, people are walking down the sidewalk, they have no interest in magic, they're just on their way, and they go, hey, wait a minute, what's this? And they walk in, you know, they want to know how a trick works, or they want something they can fool them. They don't belong in a magic shop. If you just move it up to the second floor, you eliminate all those stragglers, and the only people that will go in there are people that
I've looked
know
for the address.
It's there.
Yeah.
They say, I got to find this place. Hey, it's up these stairs, and it changes everything. And I think he's right. So I think it's too bad that magic shops are gone, and I think that teaching magic on video and then on DVD and now on downloads, for some things, is fantastic. It's infinitely better than trying to learn from a book. And what I'm talking about are coin moves or card moves, things like that, where you need to see where every finger goes and the timing of the move and to see how effortlessly it can be performed and when done properly, how good it can look. But to put entire routines with all the patter and all the everything, and sell that. So all you have to do is memorize, is just be a parrot and say, if I do everything exactly like that guy, I guess I'll be as good as that guy. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So I think that's a problem.
What was the best day of your career, Mike?
Wow. I'll tell you what one of them was. There have been a lot. One of them was when I stepped on stage at the London Palladium. And I think being a magic historian has a lot to do with that. I remember other acts there that day. And for them, it seemed like it was kind of just another gig. And I wanted to sit them down and go, do you know where you're at? Do you know what this means? Do you know who's walked out on that stage? It meant a lot to me. It was really exciting. Yeah.
Do you have a flip of that? Do you have a worst day of your career when you look back?
I remember doing my thimble act at an amusement park at Magic Mountain. I was a teenager. Mike Skinner booked me. It was outside. It was so cold that 2 minutes before I went on, I had to go to the bathroom and run hot water on my hands so that I could even do this act. And it was miserable. But I don't know. I mean, you can usually try to find some good in every situation.
I'm sorry, just to skip back actually, just one thing was, obviously you went through all the different years there. If you did have to put your finger on perhaps one performer today who, like you mentioned, Tommy Wonder, will be remembered, is there one still alive today that you think is going to have the same sort of impact that the great names had, like Tommy Wonder?
That could take a lot of thought, but without giving it a lot of thought, off the top of my head, I'd say here's what I'm excited about right now. We're going to go home in 2 days, and then about 2 weeks from now, Guy Hollingworth is going to arrive at our house, and we're going to do a week at the castle with Guy, and he's going to do his new stage act. And I've known Guy long enough to know that if he says his stage act is ready, it's going to be fantastic. He's a great magician and a great manipulator, and he's smart, and he figures out what's good and what isn't, and he works on things until they're right. I know he just spent time in Portugal with Luís de Matos working on this, and so he takes it really seriously, even though he's not a full-time pro. And I have high hopes that all the magicians in LA that think they know everything are going to come to the castle and see a great magician that they haven't seen before. So that'll be exciting.
Final question is, what do you think is the biggest problem with magic today, and how could it be fixed?
Well, maybe I just said what the biggest problem was.
Yeah, I thought that might be it, actually, yeah.
And you know what? It can't be fixed. Now, that's a dreary ending to a pleasant interview. But so I will add to that, every generation or every period of magic has had the doomsayers saying, well, this is it. This is going to be it. And the thing that I find so amazing is how resilient magic is. It can seemingly withstand anything. 500 years ago, when people were performing magic tricks and getting hauled off, for doing witchcraft and being lucky if they didn't get burned at the stake, we made it through that period. And then they started working at fairs when you're outside and there's people all around you and really tough conditions, working in the streets. That's pretty tough. But we figured out routines that work in those situations. We adapted to the environment and made it work. And like I was saying, in the golden age, it was just too perfect. It was just unbelievable. And all these guys worked their whole careers in theaters doing magic that was designed to be done on a stage with an audience in front of you. And then that all went away. And then nightclubs showed up. And all these vaudevillians would go to the nightclub and go, wait a minute. I'm supposed to do my act out in the middle of that dance floor with an audience wrapped 3/4 around me and a band behind me? It's impossible. And some of them quit, said, I'm done. This is the end of magic. And other ones said, well, I'm not done. And I'm going to figure out, if I can't do the tricks I've been doing, I'm going to figure out some new tricks that I can push out in the middle of that dance floor and perform and continue my career. And there were, of course, fantastic nightclub magicians that did exactly that. Same thing with television, and now there's guys who are world famous because they've gone viral on the internet. And so there always seems to be new ways to present magic. So I have lots of faith in the art of magic. It's not going to go away. It's going to change because it always has. And it will be interesting to see what comes next. I mean, I've seen lots and lots of young guys with so much skill, it's terrifying. They have so much skill. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with it and where they take magic in the future.
Thanks so much for talking to me.
My
I really
pleasure.
appreciate it. Thank you.
I enjoyed it.
I sincerely hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Thanks for meeting me, Mike. It was lovely to chat to you. If this interview has inspired you to learn a little bit more about magic history, then visit Mike's website. It is, of course, mcmagicwords.com. All of his literature is on there for you to purchase right now. Thanks very much for tuning in. I will see you again next week. Have a great one. Bye-bye.